think we'll just dive in. I want to give Becky enough time to cover a lot of ground in her life. You're just recently back from New York City, and tales to tell. Anyway, I'm Brian Taylor, the happy director here, and it's moments like this that make me my most happy, that's for sure. You can imagine, it's such a delight to have her. And I want to thank the volunteers who made this possible tonight. It takes about half a dozen people to make these events look like they were effortless. Jack's wife, Chris, is probably still up there, but I wish you were here listening to me thank her. And Jim and Seal and the rest of our volunteers, and Rick Marai, my co-pilot over there. We've been planning this 6 months out. And I want to thank all of you, especially the members here. Your memberships are supporting us and making this happen. And I want to thank an anonymous sponsor who very much helped bring Rebecca Senf to California. And I thank you very much. She's here tonight. She was very generous. Thanks a million. And let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Senf's background. And she is Becky to her friends, and I think that includes
everyone here. Everyone.
Yeah. Dr. Rebecca Senf is the Chief Curator at the incredible Center for Creative Photography, as you all know. And she's also the Curator of Photography at the Phoenix Art Museum. And she puts on exciting shows there. One of them near and dear to my heart, One of a Kind.
Yes.
2015.
Because Brian was in it.
How to make me boost that honorarium. Well, you have great people, Chris McCaw and others who make one-of-a-kind images. And we'll hear about all of those different aspects of your life. Becky earned a BA in Art History from the University of Arizona. And she earned her MA and PhD at Boston University. In Boston, she worked on the Museum of Fine Arts major exhibition, Ansel Adams from the Lane Collection, and she co-authored that catalog. Her books include Reconstructing the View, the Grand Canyon photographs of Mark Klett and Byron Wolfe, incredible work by such innovative people. And also To Be 13, showcasing the work of Betsy Schneider. Her curatorial interests range from historic 20th century American photography to what's happening right now in contemporary photography. Becky has curated numerous wide-ranging exhibitions in both gallery spaces and online galleries. And I know that I don't want to read her lines. She'll tell us a lot about that incredible center for, I almost called you us. More than once I have picked up the phone and said Center for Creative Photography. And I realized we're Center for Photographic Art. But at the Center for Creative Photography, which is even more self-explanatory than our name, it's part of the University of Arizona and is recognized as one of the world's finest academic museums and study centers. Maybe the world's finest. I don't know if the George Eastman House can give you a run for it, but probably not. I agree. I agree. I could rattle off statistics about the 8 million objects that are in the archives at the center. But you've got to love Ansel Adams. And this is the tie that makes us kindred spirits. You know who walked in our doors 50 years ago with great friends like Wynn Bullock and Beaumont Newhall and the Weston boys, and founded the Friends of Photography in Our Space. Well, in 1975, that was 1967 when Ansel helped found the Friends of Photography here in our same space. 1975, Ansel Adams was called to Tucson by their president, the university president, John Schaefer, who loved photography, and Ansel helped found the Center for Creative Photography in Tucson. So it's a joy to sing his praises again. I remember I read, and I want to keep this very brief, but John Schaefer has a memoir in which he talks about how the center started, and he made an offer, and I think there are a couple of Adamses in the room who will keep me honest on my history on Ansel Adams, but Ansel was so modest. In John's memoirs, he said, I offered Ansel a solo show at our university and said, maybe we could be your archive. And Ansel said, I'm not interested, and I think I'm quoting Schaefer's letter, I'm not interested in having my work just in a standalone collection. He said, but if you'll do something incredibly innovative and accept the archives of other people, then I'm interested. And so the first 5 photographers, and I hope I'm not...
No, you're laying the groundwork for
Okay.
it. This is great.
You have a lot of other things to say. But the Center for Creative Photography first accepted 5 living artists, and this means their negatives, their letters, their memoirs, their archives, their correspondence, their photographs. Incredible. I mean, this is the place that has Ansel's negatives, along with Aaron Siskin, Harry Callahan, Wynn Bullock, incredible, and Frederick Sommer, which is unreal. Those were the first 5, and the collection has grown to include 270 archival collections, including, stand back, W. Eugene Smith, Edward Weston. It's a joy to have Adamses and Westons in the house, and Bullocks in the house. Lola Alvarez Bravo, this is where you'd find Edward Weston's 8x10 negatives, his day books where he razor blade out his girlfriend's name. I heard he left the first letter T. I think we know who T is in Edward's life. And Gary Winogrand. There's 8 million archival objects in the center's collection. Today we have a super rare opportunity to hear just some of the latest things that Becky's been working on. So join me in welcoming the one and only amazing Dr. Becky Senf.
Not to undersell, but I actually don't think it's that rare. All you have to do is invite me and I'll come do a talk. Anywhere you want, I'll do a talk. So tonight, the way I approached talking to you all was to think about some of the kinds of projects I wanted to share with you. And I presumed that on balance, you have a basic idea of how exhibitions got curated. So I tried to think about other things that curators do that I could talk to you about that would give you a sense of the other kinds of ways that I work. And so I came up with 3 projects that I'm going to talk to you about. One is a lecture series that we created for the Phoenix Art Museum. One is an online exhibition that I curated, and one is a book that I have that will be published in February of 2020. And as I thought about how to connect and relate these different things, I thought about the ideas of research and invention, and the way that my job requires me to be able to do both of those things. So you can't just be full of good ideas. You have to also know how to do the research to understand and undergird and bring the details and the information to those ideas to give them the support and the strength in order to make them worthwhile and to make them scholarship. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. I have a lot to share with you. I'm going to move sort of quickly forward, but I will try and be clear. But I'm happy to answer questions at the end. And so we'll just get going. So first I'm going to talk about a lecture series that we created for the Phoenix Art Museum. And as Brian mentioned, the Phoenix Art Museum has a collaborative relationship with the Center for Creative Photography. They don't have a photography collection of their own. So in 2006, they created a partnership with the Phoenix Art Museum where works from the center's collection go on 2006 expansion, a new front lobby. And then this is the other main component of that 2006 expansion, a wing for modern and contemporary art in which the gallery for the Center for Creative Photography is found. And this is it on the top floor, that gallery for the Center for Creative Photography. So this lecture series that we did began with me. I gave the first talk, and I was invited to do a lecture for the Contemporary Forum support group. The In Focus photography group was brand new, and they said, well, why don't we have you do a lecture for our members, and that'll give you a chance to pitch membership for your new group. So I tossed around different ideas, and this is where the invention part comes in. I was trying to think about what Contemporary Forum members would like to hear from me. And so I thought, well, why don't I tell you how I find new art? That seems like something people would like to hear from a curator. How do curators discover the talent that they might show? And so I proposed this lecture, never thinking that it was going to become a lecture series because it has the most unwieldy title ever. The 10 most exciting photographers I learned about this year. It's a terrible title for a lecture series. But what happened was we created a flyer for the lecture, and it was circulated out, and one of the pictures on the flyer was that of a woman who was in the ASU graduate program. And she got a hold of it and thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to be in this lecture at the Phoenix Art Museum. She circulated it really widely. And I ended up with standing room only at the auditorium at the Phoenix Art Museum. And the program coordinator for Contemporary Forum said, that's never happened before. We've never had one of our own curators sell out the hall, no way. And so it seemed like an idea that people really were interested in. So we decided to make it an annual lecture series. So what we've done is each year we invite a different person. Probably many of you know Mary Virginia Swanson, the arts consultant, so she did 2011. Kate Ware, the curator at New Mexico Museum of Art. Whitney Johnson, the then photo editor of The New Yorker. William Hunt, the photography collector. Alan Rapp, who's a publisher and book packager. Jeff Dyer, the British novelist. Susan Bright is an independent curator based in Paris. Then Kathy Ryan, the photo editor for the New York Times Magazine. And then this coming year, Paula Ely, who's a Latin American photography collector based in Los Angeles. You'll notice it's a lot of women. Many of them are from New York, but not all. But it allows us to invite people, and we tell them you can only show artists you've learned about in the last 12 months. So we tell them a year ahead, and we say, over this year, make notes about who you're interested in. And then when you come, this is not an art history talk, this is not a scholarly talk. We want to see lots of pictures, and we want to hear why you're interested in these people that you've discovered. So here's Jeff Dyer showing the work of Eric Pickersgill. It's a project called Removed, where Eric would photograph people as if they were looking at their electronic devices, but the device has been removed. So that your attention is called to how sort of strange and foreign these gestures are. We pack the auditorium most years. It's really great to do a lecture, like as with this one, when you've got a lively, engaged, and full audience. Here's Susan Bright. She's showing work from the Aperture book that she did called Feast for the Eyes about food photographers. So she was showing the work of one of the artists she discovered in that process. Here's somebody admiring the Kathy Ryan brochure. So each year what we would do is as people came into the auditorium, we would give them a flyer that listed all the 10 photographers that they were going to hear about that night, as a way for them to have a souvenir, and that way they could follow up and learn more about those photographers. We also would hand out a ballot. So what you're seeing here is the ballot front and back for the year that Susan Bright was the speaker. And we would encourage the audience to vote for their favorite, so that it was very interactive and allowed people to feel like it's not just, Susan Bright's not just an expert who's going to come and tell you what you should think. You're going to listen about these photographers, and then you're going to say what you think about these photographers. And so then we tally up the votes, and we announce on social media who the winner is. But I love on this ballot, the person has written in, so the first one they say it's not photography. This third person is kind of photography, the fourth person is not photography, and the last person is just a copycat. So I love the fact that people felt empowered, right? They wanted to give us their feedback because we were asking, and it allowed us to create a two-way dialogue. Some of you might know that guy, Alan Fitzgerald, in our audience at the Phoenix Art Museum. And here's me introducing Kathy Ryan. And Kathy Ryan, just this past February, with a photographer, a high school photographer that she discovered at a high school art show, who she then offered a commission for the New York Times Magazine because she was so impressed with his work. So Kathy was a fascinating speaker because she talked a lot about her role as a photo editor and how this new talent, they're constantly looking for new talent to bring into the magazine. And when I first reached out to her, she said, I hope I can find 10 people in the next year. And then when she spoke, there were actually several people who not only had she found, but published in the magazine. So this was my list. Anyone who's good at math will quickly realize that's not 10 people. I actually ended up talking about 13 people because having named the lecture series, I felt like I could just ignore my own rules and talk about as many people as I wanted to. But I really used the talk as a way to share how I learned about new photographers. So it felt to me less important who the photographers were, but rather that I talked about where I discovered people. And then, as I mentioned, the flyer for the talk went viral, but additionally, then all of these people blogged about it. So there was a long time where if you Googled my name, what you found were people who had posted about the things I talked about at that lecture. So it was a really interesting moment to see the way information was circulating. So I'm going to show just a couple of the people from that lecture to give you a sense of what it looked like. So this is the work of Jane Fulton Ault. And the reason that I showed her was that I wanted to talk about how good her artist statement was. I'm going to read it real quickly. This is a project called The Burn. A controlled burn is deliberately set. Its violent destructive force reduces invasive vegetation so that the native plants can continue to prosper. The elements of the burn, the mysterious luminosity, the smoke that both obscures and reveals, suggest a liminal space, a zone of ambiguity where destruction merges with renewal. These images of regenerative destruction have a personal significance. I photographed my first burn at the same time my sister began a course of chemotherapy. Yet they constitute a universal metaphor, the moment when life and death are not contradictory, but are perceived as a single process to be embraced as a whole. And that was it. And I thought that was such a good artist statement. It gave me the insight I needed to understand the work, but nothing more than just that. This is the work of Desiree Edkins. She was the one who was the graduate student at the time. And these are works about her daughter. And I just always responded to what a strong image maker she was and the ways in which she alluded to the power of being a mom and watching your kids. This particular photographer, Cheryl Hannah Truska, was doing a project about incarcerated women who were having their babies in prison and a special pilot program that was allowing them to keep their children. Because apparently what normally happens is when women in prison have their children, the babies are taken away. And so somebody had the idea that maybe it would be a better outcome for mother and child if they were allowed to stay together. So she was doing a project about it, and I included this in my presentation to talk about the idea that sometimes a curator responds to an artist for very personal reasons. So I had a new daughter at this time, and that's one of the ways that curators connect with art. This is work by Benjamin Lowy, a photojournalist, and so these are pictures made in Afghanistan from within an armored Humvee, which is the way that the US military travels around when they were traveling in Afghanistan. And it's a whole series of these pictures where you see through the bulletproof glass of the Humvee vehicle. And I found this project so powerful because it really gave me an understanding of what that mediated relationship was between the US military and the Afghani people. When you think about the way in which they were separated. So in the picture on the right, here are these gentlemen standing on the street corner, and this armored vehicle goes by, and the American soldiers are on the inside, and the Afghani people are on the outside. This is the work of Rita Moss. This is a project called Reality TV, in which she would, over the course of a television program, take photographs across from the television. So this is actually where the ceiling and the wall meet across from her TV set. And I'm a minimalist at heart. I love the look of this body of work, but this particular one also is entitled Inauguration of President Barack Obama 2009. So when you think about the inauguration and those beautiful dresses that Michelle and the girls were wearing, I think about these colors. And then on the right, what you're seeing is Rita's website with this work on the left installed in my galleries at the Phoenix Art Museum on the right that she includes as part of her website. This was a print that she donated for one of our fundraising auctions. This is the work of Andrew Freeman. This project is called Manzanar Architectural Double. And so when World War II ended and the internment camps closed, the US government wanted to essentially erase the existence of those camps as rapidly as possible. And so at Manzanar, what they did is they sold the barracks at a very low price, but the buyer had to move them and get them off of the site. And so Andrew Freeman has done a project where he's tracked the distribution of those buildings out into other parts of California as people purchase them and then put them into new uses. So these are two different pictures of two different buildings. The one on the left is the Lone Pine Indian Reservation Tribal Office, and the one on the right is Don Becker's Garage and Guest House. And so there's a whole project of these relocated buildings. This is the work of Melvin Sokolsky, a fashion photographer from the 1960s, but one who I had just discovered in the previous year, so I shared this work as well. And then this work by the photographer Evan Baden is a project called Illuminati, where he was photographing people illuminated by the screens of their devices. And so again, we're talking about, I did this talk in February of 2010. It's been almost 9 years ago. So this had a kind of novel look at that moment. And now I think it has a very poignant look as we think about the way in which these devices are increasingly prominent in our lives. Okay, so that's topic number 1. We're going to go on to topic number 2. Not My Family Values online exhibition. So this is an exhibition that I did for the Art Photography Index platform. Art Photography Index is a massive database of contemporary photographers that's operated by Rickson Reed, who is the owner of Photo Eye Bookstore in Santa Fe and Photo Eye Gallery. This was something that Rickson did as a way to respond to the rapid changes in the photography, display, commercial gallery market, and to try and create a place where photographers could come together electronically and their work could be discovered. So what we're looking at here is a screenshot of the website, the Art Photo Index website. And here is my exhibition. So if you go to the website, you can see the whole thing there. And then this was the first exhibition that was done by my colleague Kate Ware, who's the curator at the New Mexico Museum of Art. And first I'm going to show you a little bit of Kate Ware's exhibition to give you a sense of what I had as my basis when I created my exhibition. So her exhibition was called Fear and Loathing. And I have to say, I was so incredibly impressed by it and its power that I was very intimidated when I imagined that I now needed to do something like this. What I found was really interesting about this online exhibition format is it's incredibly linear in a way that physical exhibitions are not, right? You walk into a gallery space and you decide what you're going to see first, and you decide what you're going to look at second, and you can skip works if you want to. You can go backwards or forwards. But these online exhibitions are almost more like a film strip or a movie in that you really move one way. This is the opening pair in the exhibition. And just to orient you to the way it works, if you hover on something, you get this little eye in the upper corner. The artist's name appears below the image. Then if you click that little eye, the name of the artist and the title of the work appear over top of the image. And then if you hover your cursor at the bottom, you get the thumbnails across the bottom. So technically you could bounce around in the exhibition, but it doesn't really lend itself to that. So I'm going to now proceed with Kate's, oh, that's a James Hilton Hall. I didn't even put that together. So here's the second slide. There's the third slide. What are you so afraid of? Fear that I'm not good enough. Fear that he'll find me. Fear that I'll find him. Fears admitted to me, being a bad parent, spiders, going to the dentist, failure, voicemail. Fear of losing you, fear of nothing left to say. Apprehensive, adjective, viewing the future with anxiety or alarm. So you can get a sense of what Kate has done here. And so I presented this work at a Society for Photographic Education conference. I had submitted it thinking I was going to be able to show my own exhibition, and then the timeline for the exhibition slowed down, and so I found myself presenting Kate's exhibition instead of my exhibition. And members of the audience said, I don't know if I like this. She's using these artworks in ways that the artist didn't intend exactly. She's applying over top of their artworks her own ideas. And so it's an interesting shift away from what curators normally do, where we're responsible for sharing the work as the artist intends, and really giving the curator here a kind of authorial voice to build something new, to create their own expressive work out of other people's images. So when I got invited to do this, I had just received an exhibition proposal for this exhibition called The Kids Are All Right. And it was an exhibition done by Allison Ferris at the John Michael Polar Art Center in Sheboygan, Wisconsin in 2013. And it was about parenting and families and the way that our understanding of family structure is changing. And it was offered to me as an exhibition that we could show at the CCP. And I thought, no, I think I'd just like to do my own exhibition like that. And so that was in my head when I got invited to do this online exhibition. And I thought, I'm going to use this opportunity to explore my ideas about family and family structure in an exhibition. And so this is the beginning of my exhibition. It's called Not My Family Values, an art photo index exhibition by Rebecca Senf. This was one of the most nerve-wracking experiences of my life, creating this particular exhibition. I'd already done, 24 exhibitions in physical space, big exhibitions, once in Phoenix, once in Tucson, but this really scared me. This was something, first of all, it was much more personal than I'd ever done before. It was also in an electronic format that could be shared. People were going to see this who might never see my exhibitions in Tucson or Phoenix, so I was suddenly becoming much more vulnerable. And it was a totally different set of rules. It's not like curating in physical space at all. As I mentioned, it's very linear. So I had the ability to move people through a very specific experience, which I wanted to take advantage of. So I'm going to take you through a chunk of the show, not the whole thing. So bear with me as I introduce you to this. Before having children, a person could be excused for thinking that parenting is an individual pursuit, or one undertaken by a couple who together make decisions that govern the lives of their young charges. Becoming a parent, however, makes it clear that many people are concerned with how children are raised. Concentric and overlapping circles surround a parent with pressures, judgments, and sometimes outright attacks. Pediatricians, well-meaning friends, strangers in the coffee shop, teachers, politicians, daycare providers, grandparents, siblings, and other family members judge your personal choices. Your every decision is scrutinized, and whether you answer or not, you will be judged. Judged about how you provide health care. Are you vaccinating? Where and when the baby sleeps. Never let her into your bed. What your children eat. I don't see any vegetables on his plate. How they're dressed. Where's her warm coat? What cookware you use. Is that Teflon? Your religious choices. You don't go to church on Easter. How you provide childcare. Does your son love the babysitter too much? There are extreme examples that some parents flaunt, as if challenging the culture to react. The Time magazine cover with Jamie Lynn Grumet breastfeeding her 3-year-old son transformed a personal decision into an overtly political act. There are the many, many private choices that present themselves as sensible options, or in some cases, the only option we parents can manage. The issues expand in complexity as children age and make their own choices. Kids deal with school, fashion, friends, risk-taking, sexuality, drugs, violence. The parents' real lives come into play too. The challenge of creating balance between earning a living, fulfilling oneself, and providing a nurturing home can be overwhelming. And then there are the catastrophes of normal life. A sick parent to care for, a failing marriage, a lost job, an accident, illness. We as individuals, sometimes working with dramatically compromised bandwidth, struggle as we do the best we can. The caption here says, "Everything I found in your bed this morning when I woke you up for school." Caring for children is one of the hardest things we do. They say the days are long and the years are short. The tedium, trials, both real and imagined, and the self-doubt challenge the most confident among us. Some of us worry about how parenting looks to others. I'll never forget the time I heard a friend's voice turn shrill as she yelled at her 4 kids, and I thought, ugh, I bet I sound like that. I don't want to sound like that. Small triumphs feel significant in the moment, but they don't last long, overcome by a swelling tide of actions made in frustration and exhaustion. There are lots of families. We all believe in family values, but whose family values? Yours may not be my family values. Okay, so we've just skipped some pictures. From the time I was a little girl, I knew I wanted to be a mom. As the oldest among the kids of my parents and their friends, I did lots of babysitting and loved it. As a graduate student, I watched a classmate's infant daughter. It was a life-saving experience, something real and meaningful amid the psychological endurance sport that is graduate school. These experiences meant that I was well-versed in some of the messy realities of caring for children, the boredom, the frustration, the worry, the vomit. Now that I'm caring for my own children, most of the time I love it. I loved being pregnant. I loved having a newborn. I love the toddler stage. 5-year-olds are endearingly cute. I love the people that my 6 and 10-year-old kids are now. I hear from parents of older children, it just gets better. When I learn that someone is having a child, one of the things I tell them is that parenthood is even better than I expected. Before I became a mom, I made mental notes about the great parents around me. I also quickly judged others, somehow thinking that things would be different for me. My kids would be great eaters and sleepers, as well as being polite, clean, and healthy. I was unprepared for what it would feel like to have that critical eye turned on me. I find the term tomboy totally inadequate for describing my 6-year-old daughter. Compared to my childhood, gender and sexuality now seem so fluid. I realize little has really changed other than how and how much we talk about this key aspect of identity. My daughter wears boys' clothes, including a shirt and tie to her piano recital and swim trunks in the pool. She has a boy's haircut, which I refer to as a pixie cut. My husband and I persuaded her to get her ears pierced, explaining that fewer people would mistake her as a boy. It didn't work. People always assume I have 2 boys. She's constantly referred to by strangers as Buddy. One Whole Foods checker even said, "I like your son's earrings." They were blue, sparkly stars. My daughter's insistence on appearing like a boy leaves me unsure of what guidance I should provide. Should I reassure her that being female is great? Should I ask her if she likes girls or boys? Is she too young for that? Should I say nothing and let her lead? Could she be confused, wanting help? I love the person she is, no matter what her gender or sexuality. I just want to parent the right way. But on reflection, there probably is no right way. So now we've skipped again a bunch of pictures. We all judge other people's families. We all defend the choices we make. Why do photographers focus on the family? Because the family is the heart of who we are. So then the last slide is the list of the artists in the exhibition. And then I wrote a special note about the curating process that includes some of the stuff I told you about how difficult it was and how it's a very different thing than curating a physical space. And then I'm going to say just a word here about the research part. So this is what I started with. This is Art Photo Index, and you can either browse the artists in the database this way by alphabetical order, or you can search. And so what I did is I would start to use search terms. So for instance, this is everything that came up when I searched for children. And then I would just look through those hundreds and hundreds of images, looking for pictures that fit with these ideas that I had about what this exhibition was going to be. And then what you did is I could pull them into a gallery, and that compiled all the pictures that I was looking at. And then I could also invite photographers to submit images to me, which in some cases there were photographers' work that I knew I wanted to include, but they weren't yet on Art Photo Index. And so I invited them to add their images. And then this is what I curated from this group. And so here you can see I've got these different templates across the bottom to use to create the slide layouts. And then there were also text ones. And then this is me. This is a tweet that I did. How does a museum curator create an online exhibition? She prints images so she can move them around. Rickson Reed hit the roof when I tweeted this. He said, Becky, the whole point is you're supposed to be curating it in the software. And I said, I'm sorry, Rickson, I just can't. I've got to see them all at once and be able to move them around and get them in the right order. So that was my process for that. I will say that it ended up being very gratifying once it finally was live. People reacted in really positive ways, and in particular reacted to how personal it was. People would ask if the writing was mine. It was a way they had never seen me before, and so it was really interesting to go through the vulnerability of doing the project and then the reward of having it so well responded to. Okay, and then our final project, Making a Photographer, Ansel Adams book. So for this last section, I'm going to talk about a forthcoming publication. So my dissertation research was on Ansel Adams, and it was a long time ago. It was now more than 10 years ago. And over those 10 years, I've been working towards making that dissertation a publishable book. And I'm really pleased to say earlier this year, Yale University Press accepted the publication, and they are going to co-publish it with the Center for Creative Photography. It won't be out until February of 2020, but I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview of it tonight. So, you probably recognize this guy, and you probably recognize him looking like this, right? This is the Ansel that we all know. But what I want to do with my book is help you understand this Ansel and this Ansel here on the left, or this Ansel, or this Ansel, or this Ansel. I love this picture. So here's the camera on the tripod, here's his backpack, here's a case for camera equipment, he's got the map, his shoes poking out here as he sits in the shade to get himself oriented. Okay, so the book is called Making a Photographer, the Early Work of Ansel Adams. And I'm going to read, which I don't like to do when we do a talk, but letting you know what's in the book. So I'm going to read from chapter 3, which is called Ansel Adams and the Sierra Club, Canadian Rockies Album of 1928. And I'm going to read just 7 paragraphs, so don't panic that I've got you all trapped here and I'm going to read to you all night. Okay. Adams reveled in the companionship of the Sierra Club and particularly enjoyed the conversation, humor, and social life that characterized the club's summer trips. Founded in June 1892, the club united 2 distinct but complementary groups. one made up of people looking for outing companions, and another that wanted to form a Yosemite watchdog group. When Adams joined the Sierra Club in the late 1910s, when he was in his teens, his initial interest was in hiking and photographing the mountains. But over time, he became a dedicated and vocal advocate for their preservation. The club's goals were to explore and enjoy the mountains and render them accessible, to publish authentic information about them, and to enlist the support and cooperation of the public and of the government in preserving the forests and other natural features of the Sierra Nevada. The club's membership, which included mainly Berkeley and Stanford professors, U.S. Geological Survey scientists, and legislators, unanimously elected writer and naturalist John Muir as the first president. Once incorporated, the group quickly expanded to include scholars, doctors, lawyers, and bankers. The Sierra Club, as it stands today, is a massive and well-established member organization and political action group. With its prominent place in contemporary American environmentalism, our concept of today's Sierra Club might eclipse the markedly different club of the first decades of the 20th century. Adams once pointed out that backpacking and hiking as popular hobbies are, in fact, recent developments, whereas when the club was created, quote, the members considered themselves a mountaineering elite, for there were few people, other than hunters, prospectors, timber and sheepmen, who ventured into the mountain vastness, end quote. Though the club grew steadily between its 1892 founding and the 1920s, when Adams first took part in its original activities, this sense of the club as a specialized clique remained much the same over those initial 30 years. Sierra Club tradition asserts that Muir suggested the idea of a club outing around the turn of the 20th century, but that William Colby, the club's secretary, became the first outing leader, whose 28 years in the job shaped the mechanics and tone of the summer trips. Colby proposed that, quote, an excursion, if properly conducted, will do an infinite amount of good toward awakening the proper kind of interest in the forests and other natural features of our mountains, and will also tend to create a spirit of good fellowship among our members, end quote. In the summer 1901, 96 club members joined the first outing, hiking to Tuolumne Meadows just north of Yosemite Valley. From their base camp, the participants embarked on short side trips and climbed the surrounding mountains, while a commissary cooked all their meals on a massive Klondike stove hauled to the site by wagon. In the announcement describing the outing, Colby warned potential participants about the rustic conditions. Quote, it should be distinctly understood by everyone that this excursion is to be a camping trip, and there will be no hotels or stopping places of any descriptions where either meals or beds can be obtained. The nature of the trip and the absence of tables will require that in the actual serving of food, the members of the party render themselves some slight assistance. Knife, fork, spoon, plates, cup, and 2 saucers will be furnished, end quote. Although he encouraged campers to sleep on the ground, the first outing offered cots for the uninitiated. Future trips did not have wagons for baggage, so beginning in 1902, in democratic fashion, everyone roughed it. And we're seeing here on the left, the 1902 trip, so you see all the women in their long skirts and the men gathered around the campfire area. Roughing it by outing standards, however, included hot meals. The trips employed a chef and commissary, and even when the wagons were abandoned as too limiting after the first year's trip, mules hauled specially designed stoves for cooking the evening's dinner. And we see that stove there on the right. So then I go on and I talk about outing entertainment, so I'm going to continue that here. Adams enjoyed the campfire theatricals, even authoring and acting in some of the most memorable and outrageous ones. This is a page from the Ansel Adams archive. During the summer outing of 1931, he wrote a mock Greek tragedy called Exhaustos, in which King Dihydros spears with his archenemy Rycrispos of Paucha, while the traitorous Princess Clytemnestra aids her father's nemesis. During the first act, the narrator, played by Adams himself and christened the spirit of the itinerary, here's Adams, kneeling in the foreground. So this is Adams, the narrator, proclaiming, quote, from 4 in the morning till 10 every night, the life of Dihydros is devoid of delight. Right Crispos is threatening, the queen gives abuse, his daughter's a traitor, his son's of no use. Oh, hard is the life of Dihydros the mighty, among other things, he's forgotten his nighty. Adams engaged in silly word games. The king's mule Pegasus was last seen headed toward Modestos, a pun on the California Central Valley town of Modesto, and woven references to the Sierra Club. Right Crispos' army was defeated by the flash of cup and spoon among the willows. Members of the outing party perform the play with Adams as spirit of the itinerary, holding aloft a harp of bent wood and fishing line. Half a century later, when describing the play and its sequels, The Trudgeon Women, The Oxides, and the unfinished The Mules by Arrest Your Fannies, he remarked, quote, "How funny these plays were in situ and how dull when given anywhere else," end quote. Although the earliest outings used the base camp format, by the time Adams took part in the trips during the 1920s, the group, which by then numbered about 200 participants, usually established a new campsite every few days. On moving days, when the whole group relocated from one campsite to another, the cooks prepared a breakfast of cereal, cooked dried fruit, bacon, coffee, and chocolate before sunrise. After a shared morning meal, hikers set out alone or in small groups, having been apprised of the route and its challenges the night before. They moved along the trail at their own pace, some lingering to admire the wildflowers, make photographs, or appreciate the scenery, while others aimed to get directly to their destination, select a place to bunk, and relax in camp. Lunch was packed the night before from the commissary's offerings of crackers, hardtack, bread, salted or dried meat, canned sardines, cheese, salted nuts, chocolate, raisins, or other dried fruit. Many hikers stopped streamside to make hot tea. Adams took advantage of the freedom to make photographs along the trail. When the hikers reunited in a new camp for dinner and evening entertainment, the campfire stories were enriched by another day's adventures. So what happens next in the chapter is that I discuss in detail the album that he made for the 1928 outing, which was to the Canadian Rockies. So I literally go page by page in some parts and talk about, what he was doing, how the album was structured. So then, a comparison of Adams's 1928 outing album with another made the same year by fellow Sierra Club outing member demonstrates the sophistication of Adams's images and underscores the effective sequence with which he organized the master album. One such album, prepared by Josephine Zook Spates, who was born about 1888, is part of the Bancroft Library's Sierra Club collection. So we're seeing a work here from her album by Josephine Spates. Little is known about Spates except that she was from Pasadena and that her brother later donated her album to the Bancroft Library. Women had been members of the club from its founding in 1892, and female outing members actually outnumbered males on the 1928 trip. According to the personnel list, 144 participants went on that year's trip. Of that group, 75 were women, only 10% of whom, based on the participants' names, were either wives traveling with their husbands or part of a brother-sister or father-daughter pair. These figures suggest that most female participants were either on their own or were with friends. That women made up such a large percentage of the overall party reflects that these women hikers felt accepted by the club, safe in the group's company, and were willing and able to participate in the trip's requirements of strenuous hiking and sleeping outside. In the Spates album, more than half of the pictures include people or man-made objects, a much greater proportion than in Adams's album. Like Adams, she documented the chains of impressive mountain peaks in panoramas, whereas Adams used a series of individual prints to suggest the continuous sweep of landscape. She abutted 2 prints in her album to create a panorama. So that's what we're seeing here. You can see that she actually trimmed the print and then squashed them together to create the appearance of a panorama, whereas Adams took 2 separate pictures, and you can see that the peak here repeats there, So he's kind of showing you the sweep of the panorama, but then you have to put them together in your mind. Both Adams and Spates made views of a string of hikers ascending a snowy mountainside. Adams cropped his picture to make it more abstract, removing foreground footprints to heighten the linear impact of the picture and to flatten the subject within the picture plane. So what we're seeing here is the final that appears in the album, but this is the proof print out of the Center for Creative Photography archive, so we can see what he shot and then how he printed it. And so I added that black line to indicate where it gets cropped down to. In contrast, Spates' picture of the same subject, which we see here, includes footprints extending from the lower left corner up to the climbers on the mountainside. She included the ground at her feet, asserting her experience in relation to the picture and creating a dramatically different view from Adams's more formal and detached presentation of the same subject. So that's the end of what I'm going to read. And then for the rest of the chapter, I talk about how Adams included 9 of the Canadian Rockies pictures in a 1930 exhibition that he had at the Smithsonian Institution. And then the book overall, the point of the book overall is to argue that while Adams, during his lifetime, really downplayed the role and the importance of his early work, I'm making the argument that actually the early work is pretty important, in that it allows us to see him develop into the photographer that we know. So pictures like this one on the left don't look much like the Adams we know, but by looking really closely at the way those pictures from the 20s and 30s evolved, we can see him then arrive in the 1940s as the photographer that we're familiar with. So the book will be published in the spring of 2020. Feel free to invite me back, and I would be delighted to do a book event here for all of you when that happens. All right, good. But for tonight, I think that's it, and I would be happy to take some questions.
Fantastic.
Does anybody have questions? I should have warned you that we were getting close to the end so that you had a chance to, because I know we just zoomed. It was like a roller coaster ride through a bunch of different things.
Here's a conversation starter. You mentioned, you've been a curator, I think, before there were online galleries. And so you used a term that's new to the world. You might not have coined it, but you talk about the difference between physical galleries, versus a new kind of gallery. Any thoughts on those two different ways of looking at pictures?
Well, I mean, I'm a gal who loves objects. I mean, that's why I'm a curator, because we love the physical thing. But to ignore the fact that more of us are experiencing images in digitally mediated ways would be to have your head in the sand. I mean, you can't be participating in this world and not recognize what's happening. So I think we need to think about both of those things, because if we only expect people to see the physical object, then we're missing opportunities. And I mean, this is a danger with me, but I'm going to point back to Ansel Adams. He was someone who knew from the beginning that more people were going to see his work in reproduction than would ever see his fine prints, which is why he was so concerned about having high reproduction quality. So, here's a guy who believed, a modernist, believed in the value of the physical object, believed that they were works of art, but also thought about all the other ways people were going to encounter his work. So he maybe didn't imagine Instagram, but he did know that you need to think about how other people are going to see your work. So, yeah, I think we need to be shaping that. We can't turn our back on it. We want to be involved. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I have 2 questions. One, what are some of your favorite exhibitions that you've curated? And then, who are some of the artists, photographers, current photographers that you're most excited about?
Okay. So curators are just like artists. So one of my favorite exhibitions is the one I have on the walls at the Phoenix Art Museum right now. It's the work of a woman named Betsy Schneider, who was a professor at Arizona State University. She's now based in Boston, and she, with her Guggenheim Award, did a project about 13-year-olds. So the project's called triskaidekaphobia, which is the word for the fear of the number 13. And she photographed over the course of a year 250 13-year-olds. She worked with a 4x5 camera, shot film, made 5 portraits of each kid, and then also did a video interview with each of them. So what we're showing at the Phoenix Art Museum are small, unframed sheets with every one of the 250 kids' portraits, and then enlargements of 20 of the portraits. And some of the enlargements are large. The bigger ones are the size of the lit up part of the screen. And then a film she created by weaving together the things that the kids said in their video interviews. I've already admitted to you, I respond to work as a mom, and so I knew that I was really interested in that body of work, and I believed in it, and I knew as soon as Betsy showed it to me, I wanted to show it. We did a book as well with Radius Books. What has really lifted my heart is presenting it at Phoenix Art Museum and watching how our audiences are reacting to it. So the exhibition is set up. There's a little space outside the exhibition at an overlook into the sculpture garden. And we wanted to have an interactive component, and you'll recognize this sort of thing. There are a bunch of us in a meeting thinking about what the interactive component should be, what should it be, should it be this, should it be that. And then somebody said, why don't we ask the teen council what the interactive component should be? I was like, oh, right, that's what we should do. So the teen council came up with 2 ideas. One of them is to have people draw their own picture of themselves, a self-portrait. But the other one that has just blown my socks off is they ask people to write a message to their 13-year-old self. Right? So just let that settle in, what kind of an idea that is. So people can write it, and then there are these envelopes, and so you tuck your message into an envelope, and then other visitors to the exhibition can read your note to your 13-year-old self. So some of them are funny, some of them are like, you should brush your teeth more, or sorry, but your boobs aren't ever going to get any bigger. but there was a day, and I am not making this up, that 2 of the letters in those envelopes were letters people were writing to their 13-year-old self who was a different gender than they currently were. So 2 transgendered people writing about, hang in there. I know it seems bad, but you're gonna make it, and it's gonna be okay, and you just gotta stick with it. And to me, that suggests the power of that body of work. That people in Phoenix, Arizona, which you all know is not known as a bastion of liberality, could come into that museum and could, in that public space, be that vulnerable and be willing to share something that personal. I just thought the artist's acceptance and willingness to be so open with the kids is making people feel safe in this space. And it just blew me away. I just feel so proud to have done something that made that work available to our audience. And then in terms of artists I'm watching now, there's so much good work being produced. As someone who's really interested in materiality, I'm often interested in looking at photographers who are using historic materials in new ways and are engaged with the physical qualities and properties of photographic paper. I'm also interested in people who are doing things exclusively online. It's such a vast, maybe ask me after and I'll try and come up with some names. Yes, sir.
Kind of get back to Ansel Adams here.
Certainly.
This is a very interesting picture now. First time, that cropping actually takes the essence of that height. The left is, at least my value judgment, much better because it's taken out a lot of noise from the picture, which is distracting, and it has retained the concept of a really good sized number of people hiking in the probably early spring or something, early summer, up in the mountains, but you don't need the rest of it to see that.
Mhm.
How many other pictures of the classics of Ansel Adams are also cropped to achieve that?
So this is, here we're in 1928.
Right.
So this is pre-Group F-64 conversion. I think some people falsely believe that Group F-64 felt that you should never crop. That's not accurate to the historical record. But I do think, especially people like Edward Weston, it was important to Edward to compose with the negative, with the frame. That was where, for him, the creative process was happening. For Adams, the creation of the negative was only a component of the creative process, right? You all have seen, the kind of dodging and burning that Adams did. That was a piece of making that photograph. So I think for him, if he didn't get it quite right with the negative, I don't think for him it felt uncomfortable to change. I mean, I would say not many of the Adams iconic views have any kind of cropping, although as soon as those words are out of my mouth, that Lone Pine sunrise picture, with the horse in the pool of sunlight, we have at the center half a dozen prints of it, and they're all different aspect ratios. He printed them and then presented them differently. And I mean, again, I know I'm in Ansel Adams territory, so I'm not telling you anything new, but that quote of the negative being like the composer's score and the print being the performance, he didn't feel like he owed the photographer who made the negative, meaning himself at that earlier moment, anything. If on that day, the print should be a little bit shorter, so that it felt a little bit wider, that was totally legit. So I mean, it's not, one could do this, right? One could go back through and compare the proof prints with the finished print and see, but I suspect that once he's in his mature phase, there's not that much cropping going on. And certainly not to sort of change the impact of the picture quite like this.
I'm not suggesting there's anything wrong with cropping.
Yeah.
It's actually, it makes the message clear.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But he's young here, I mean, he's 26 years old, he's 10 years into making photographs, and he's still learning. I mean, that's part of the reason he didn't want us to focus on these early pictures. He knew he was still in a learning process. So right, here he makes the picture in a way that then when he's in the darkroom, he says, you know what, this wasn't exactly right. But he's also, he's under pretty difficult conditions when he's out in the mountains making these pictures. So to rethink it seems reasonable. And yeah, I didn't mean to imply that you were suggesting that cropping was somehow wrong, but there are people that sometimes feel like, isn't cropping breaking the rules? Didn't the Group F-64 say you shouldn't crop? So, I just wanted to address that. There was a question over here.
Oh,
Yes.
I'm very impressed with your dissertation, and I was wondering at what stage in your life did you first engage with his images?
Oh, as a child. My dad was a psychologist, and like many psychologist dads, he had a 35mm camera and shot transparency film. And so, I was one of those kids who on the family road trip had to sit in the middle of Monument Valley as the car got pulled while he was out there trying to make a picture of the mittens or whatever. So, I mean, from the time I was really little, and in fact, my mom now will, give me, like one day I come home from work and she's got on my dining room table 4 Ansel Adams wall calendars from, the early 1980s that are marked with our doctor's appointments and my dad's, travel, or a copy of Photographs of the Southwest that she bought for him one Christmas and assigned to my dad. So it was, I don't know when I didn't know about Ansel Adams.
You're lucky. You're very lucky.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Diane?
Well, I really appreciated the way that you framed your remarks in terms of your work as a curator and how you do the research and the kind of discovery and invention, and that your work as a curator brings you into a role that's very much like an artist or an author. And I thought that really came through very clearly in the 3 examples that you gave of the 10 most exciting works that artists that you had learned about, and the online work, and in this Ansel Adams work. Really terrific examples of that kind of research and discovery project that really is creative. And I was thinking about the emphasis on the museum context and the museum role of a curator that comes through very clearly in the first 2 examples that you gave. And then now, obviously, the Ansel Adams work is part of a museum world, but all of these pieces, as you pointed out, were created by Adams before he was part of a museum world or a gallery world. And I was wondering if you could say something about who was his audience, who did he make these photographs for? And did he just give them to the Sierra Club, or did people buy them? And how did he make money on them? And so how do, in the pre-curatorial and pre-museum phase of Adams, what was going on?
So the notion of audience is actually an important part of my argument. And part of what I think happens with Adams over this learning period is he learns how to think about an audience. He learns how to consider who they are and what they want, and how to make pictures that will meet their needs. So the chapter after this is about the Taos Pueblo book. And in that example, he's become, by the late 1920s, involved in various book collecting groups in the San Francisco Bay Area, which has a very strong tradition of fine press imprints. And so he takes that knowledge and makes a book. But he doesn't just make a book. He makes a book that has such unique characteristics that it's incredibly collectible. And so he really, by that point, has this acute sense of who his audience is and what they want, especially in terms of packaging the thing. At this point, the Sierra Club album that I'm talking about in this chapter is actually a sales book. It is an album that, with all the prints numbered, to allow people to purchase works for themselves. But the premise was here during this era that everyone who made pictures on the trip would create an album. All the albums went into the offices of the Sierra Club in San Francisco, and that you made the prints at cost for any of the other trip members, right? So whoever had a camera might have gotten a better shot of this or that, and then you could create your own album out of the best pictures that everyone took. Adams did that, but this is, again, part of this evolution of him becoming more savvy. He would offer the prints at cost, but if you wanted them on special paper, or you wanted them enlarged, or you wanted them, presented in a special way, there was a fee for those extra things. So you can, again, see him beginning to think about, well, if I'm gonna support myself doing this, what is that gonna look like? How do I take this audience of my fellow Sierra Club members and pitch this product to them? And so that is very much in his mind. Most of his money through this period is not coming through the sale of prints. And actually then the next chapter, after the Taos Pueblo chapter, is about his work with the Yosemite Park and Curry Company, which was the concession in Yosemite Park that provided the restaurants and the hotels. And he worked through the marketing department of Yosemite Park and Curry Company and received a pretty substantial stipend from them. So much so that in 1934, we have the cash log for 1934 in the center's collection. Half of his income for that year came from the Yosemite Park and Curry Company. It was enough money to pay his mortgage payments that year. So this was not like a little side thing he had. It was really pretty fundamental to his supporting himself and his family at that time. So all the photographers were trying to invent how you did this thing. And it takes a long time.
Becky, let's have time for one more question, but it can only be asked by someone who has the genes of Wynn Bullock.
And then I'm happy to answer other questions. I think Brian just wants to make sure that you have a glass of wine in your hand so that you can enjoy the evening.
You too.
Yes, Barbara.
Becky, first I just wanted to say how moved I was by your online exhibition. I think it's really beautiful. And both Kate's and yours opens a window, I think, to a new kind of creative process for showing photography. It combines things that's very exciting to me, so I really thank you for sharing that. My question has to do with, your dissertation is what, 9 years old?
Yeah, I submitted it in December of 2007, so more
So-
than 10 years.
In the book that's going to be published in 2020, how much is new material? How much has changed in your perception over the 10 years that you wrote it and now?
Yeah, so as much as it's hard to have had it out of you for those 10 years, there are some advantages. So as the curator for the Center for Creative Photography, I curate Adams a lot. I did a major show for the Phoenix Art Museum in 2010, a huge show. I've curated literally dozens of small Adams shows for the Center for Creative Photography. I'm in the archive with regularity. And there's not much new content from the dissertation. When you write a dissertation, you get to do a degree of research that's hard to ever get back to again. You know, I may never. So the bulk of the content was there when I turned in the dissertation. What's happened in the 10 years since, and it's a very astute question to ask, what's happened in the 10 years since is that I know that it's right. So when I published it, it was a hypothesis, right? That's what a dissertation is. You set out a thesis and you say, I'm going to give you all the evidence, way too much evidence, more evidence than anybody needs to read, of why the argument that I'm making is right. So you think it's right, I was pretty sure it was right, but I've had 10 years to spend time with the material and to spend time with Adams and to be back in and out of the material, and I feel certain that what I supposed then is right. And so that's a really great place to be, to no longer be at all tentative or hypothesizing about the content, but to really know that what we can see in those early years is him getting a kind of footing that produces the confident and powerful and articulate artist that is still resonant. That's why he's still resonant, because he learned so much in those early years about how to talk to us and how to think about that audience and how to make the pictures that would connect with us. So that's what's happened, and it feels really, I feel really fortunate to have had that time for it to marinate, to percolate, and to feel really sure about the things that I'm saying. Yeah, so,
Fantastic.
thank you.
Becky, brilliant.
Thank you.
Hey, let's continue the conversation, only with a glass of wine in your hand.
There you go.
And look at what Becky said.